Hey folks, welcome back to another Dice Tower preview. I'm Mark, and today we're taking a look at Crystal Age, which is brought to you by Graviton Games. It's for 1 to 4 players, ages 12 and up, and games generally run about 30 to 120 minutes. Long ago, a colossal crystal from the sky crashed into the center of the Ansel lands, forming a massive crater. The nearby kingdoms became corrupt, and the creatures that lived there turned more powerful and hostile. The kingdoms secured the crater with the power of the Guardians, who were imbued with powerful magic, and built a gigantic wall to prevent the spread of this strange disease called corruption. Crystal Age is a fantasy strategy game. Take control of a powerful hero and venture on a dangerous journey. Defeat exotic creatures to acquire their abilities, gain the favor of the Guardians, and reach the center of the crater to destroy the corruption or dominate it. There are 3 modes of play, and your objective will change based on that mode. Playing solitaire, your objective is to defeat one of the Lords of Corruption. In the cooperative game, you need to defeat as many Lords of Corruption as there are players in the game, 2 to 4. And in the competitive game, your objective is to hold 3 turns in the center of the crater. Can you defeat the corruption? Join me as we take a closer look. So there's some setup variance based on player count, and it's really how you set up the main cards for the creatures or the corruption you're going to be dealing with. And each of these card decks are going to relate to a different area of the board. So as you move around, you're going to have to deal with the different creatures and so forth. So starting around the edge of the board is the wall. The wall is what's keeping the corruption out away from the other lands. And then we've got the biodomes, and you have the wastelands and the forests. And then finally in the center where the crystal hit is the crater. And this is where you're going to find the more difficult creatures, the more difficult corruption to deal with. So as you can imagine, the wall is going to be easier creatures. They get a little harder in the different biodomes. Then finally, again, that crystal area or the crater is going to be really difficult. But the higher level creatures you deal with, the more benefit you get by defeating them. The crater deck also has crystal cards, which allow you to summon the Lords of Corruption and do battle. And there are portals in each of the corners giving you fast travel around the board. And then you have the Guardians, and to get to the crater, you're going to have to do the Guardians challenge to get past them and so forth. So your characters are all going to start on the edge of the board in the 4 corners around the wall. Your hero card has a series of icons at the bottom to take note of. Now there's basic things here obviously that you'll be very recognizable, like health, your defense, how many dice you're using to attack with, and so forth. But there's a handy reference guide to show you what all these icons do. And they're kind of broken down in categories. You have pre-combat icons, you have offensive icons, and finally you have your defensive icons. Now all of these are going to be the same regardless of your hero or the creatures that are in play, be it either the corruption or, which we haven't even talked about yet, the Lords of Corruption. These are the big bosses, so to say, in the game that you're trying to defeat. So they are super powerful, and once you capture one of them, you will be able to flip them over and use their special ability on the back. So it is pretty handy and awesome when you can get those in hand. So the basics of gameplay here, and really what you're doing in the game is going to be very dependent on which mode of the game you're playing. But here are the basics. So first and foremost, you have the movement phase, and then you have the action phase. So on the movement phase, you have 3 choices. You can either walk, jog, or run. Walk will move 1 space, jog will move 2, and run will move 3. Now running will limit your options in the action phase of the game. But really that movement is going to take you to the fight corruption. Unless you're running, you will not get to do this. So if you move 1 space, you can choose to fight corruption by drawing 2 cards of that particular area and dealing with one of the creatures. You pick one and discard the other. And then if you jogged, you only get to draw 1 and then fight that creature. But again, running, you will not get to do this. So again, that's all dependent on where you are on the board, starting with the wall or the biodomes or finally the crater. So after moving, then you go into the action phase, which we kind of talked about already. Fight the corruption is one of the main actions you're going to be performing as you move around the board. So as a quick example, we're going to use Diane. She's going to move 1 space around the wall, and she's going to fight a juggernaut. She decided this is the one. It's going to have a special ability. It gets an extra corruption dice, but you calculate that all based on the bottom of the card, and it's basically going to be a roll-off. But Diane does have a pre-combat ability. She has an ambush, which is pretty handy. She's going to get 1 unstoppable damage, which takes the juggernaut down to only 2 health. And she's got like 20 health, so that's pretty awesome. But she also has an ability in the combat phase to change one of the values of her dice. And why is that important? Because for defense values, you need to meet or beat the defense value on the card in order to do damage to either the hero or the creature that you're fighting. And it works that way with all the different types of creatures and the Lords of Corruption as well. So it's really that simple. You're going to be doing dice roll-offs, you're going to be calculating, and as you build up your character, you're going to have more and more abilities based on the cards that you capture. Now, the cards you capture, you can only have one of each type of creature, but you can only have 3 creatures, so you can't have 3 of the same, is what I'm saying. And you have to make some tough choices down the road because there's some pretty interesting creatures and abilities you can gain as you put them into play with your character. It's a really neat aspect, actually, as you gain these special abilities. And there's initiative values as well when you go into deathmatch and you fight, so you got to keep that in mind. And there's different ways to raise your initiative if you have different types of crystals from the board. So it's a very much a back and forth, and it really varies based on level from the different zones that you're fighting in. Another action you might perform is fight against a hero. This is really to the death. So you're going to go round after round, fighting just like you do with a creature, using your abilities, your different offensive abilities, your defensive abilities, rolling dice back and forth. And the thing is once you reduce someone to 0, they're really done and out of the game. They lose everything. They basically lose the game. And if you're defeated by creatures and things, there's various things that happen. But in general, you're going to lose if you're reduced to 0. Or you might choose to get the Guardian's favor, and you're going to have to challenge one of these 4 figures in the middle of the board. You have to be adjacent to one of them, and first and foremost, you're going to take damage based on the number of crystals that are in their base. Though it's unstoppable, unblockable damage, you'll take that first. And then you can only use your offensive abilities, no pre-combat abilities. So you'll do your roll-offs, trying to attack them, use your abilities that you have from other creatures you've collected, and so forth, trying basically to do 4 points of damage. Now, these Guardians all have armor of 3, so you have to roll 3 or better in order to do damage to them. But once you do defeat one, then it comes to your play area and you'll get to use that Guardian's special ability. Again, those abilities are all located on the back of your reference card, showing what you can use and help you through the course of the game. But it also opens up a pathway to the crater. And then the final action available to us is either dominate or destroy the corruption. Now, it's all dependent on which game mode you're playing in. If it is the competitive, then you need to hold the center of the crater for 3 rounds. If there's a hero there, you have to first knock them out by going into deathmatch and basically destroying them. And then you have to hold that position for 3 rounds. Every round, you'll draw another creature from the crater deck, and you'll have to defeat it, and basically king of the hill here, holding it for 3 rounds in a row. But if you're playing the cooperative or solitaire, you're going to have to do a similar thing, but you have to hold that position and take on one of the Lords of the Corruption. These are the bigger, heavy hitters. And the thing with these guys is that solitaire you have to just defeat one, but it depends in the cooperative game how many players there are will determine how many of these you need to defeat. They are very difficult. So you got to keep that in mind as you do this. And then once you enter into that position of the middle of the board, then you can't move. You have to hold it until you're destroyed or you succeed in destroying the corruption or dominating it. It's really that simple. So it's kind of a finishing move, so to say, in the game. You need to kind of build yourself up before you take on that corruption. And what you're doing is all dependent on which game mode you're taking part of. Now, I played the cooperative. I really like the cooperative version quite a bit. But the competitive was interesting, and I did not try the solitaire, but there's some definite basics between all the different versions that you're going to be doing, just really trying to ramp your character up, getting ready for that end game. Now, the last thing I want to mention are the consumables. Those are the gems out on the main board. Now, in the bases of the different Guardians are the destruction gems, and we briefly touched on those. And in the competitive game, having those gems allows you to have some unblockable damage, throwing as many of those gems out, doing a massive amount of damage all at once to your opponent, if you have those gems. So those are good to hold on to for sure at key moments. But you also have these yellow gems. These are smoke bombs, and when you pick these up, you can choose to use them in a deathmatch, a battle one-on-one, and that gives you an initiative of 10. But more importantly, the gems that you want to try to grab early on perhaps are these green ones. These are health potions, giving you 3 health only, but it might help you out of a sticky situation. Having those I found to be very key and definitely came into play. So those are really all the basics of play, like I said, and it all comes down again to what mode of the game you're playing and how you're going to proceed and what you're going to do and how best to build up your character. All right, folks, just a reminder once again, this has been a Dice Tower paid preview, and everything you've seen here has been in prototype form, so keep a close eye on the campaign for any changes that still may occur. Now, with that said, there's a fair amount of icons to get your head around, but once you do, it's very quick and easy to play. The battles go very smoothly, very quick as you just engage, roll dice back and forth, and again, I like games that are dice checking type games. And the different levels of dice, those corruption dice, definitely matter as you enter into the battles and so forth. So there's a lot of interesting play there as you build up your character, and I found that to be the most fun for me. Along with obviously the dice checking, but I love the fact of how you can move around the board and really just enhance your character to its fullest to try to meet the objectives of the game. But folks, ultimately, if this looks like something of interest to you, I'm sure they'd appreciate your support. So I think that's it for me, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.